SpongeBob is one of the most iconic cartoons in our generation, and I used to watch so much of it, and still do from time to time. With a massive franchise like SpongeBob, there are bound to be some video game adaptations of this series. And hey, I love SpongeBob, I love video games, so of course, today I'm going to be playing every SpongeBob SquarePants game on Nintendo Switch. Not only are we going to be playing the games on the limited hardware of the Switch and learning all the unique quirks of these versions, but we're also going to uncover some controversial, somewhat scummy decisions made by the publishers. What better way to start off the SpongeBob journey than with the first SpongeBob game released on Switch, Nickelodeon Kart Racers. Now I know what you're thinking, this technically isn't a SpongeBob game. Well, tell me, who's on the front cover? I'm still going to be looking at all the games that feature SpongeBob because those are technically SpongeBob games. I'll mainly be looking at SpongeBob in those games and see how the series is featured in them. Also, this video would be way shorter if I don't. Jumping into the game, and oh, SpongeBob is looking cursed. Oh, that's right, the menus look so bad. Almost AI generated or partly fan made. The font is also ugly. But let's play Grand Prix. We have a few cups. Playing a race was worse than I remember. I forgot how stale this game looked and felt. Not only does the tracks look incredibly bland and low texture and just thrown together, the gameplay doesn't complement anything. The controls of the vehicle is horrible. The drifting feels too sudden, and the physics are so floaty yet incredibly complex. I think on top of that, when you're playing with others, it feels so janky. Like sometimes I'll randomly get hit out of nowhere and I won't even know what from. But let's talk about the performance, as generally, some of the biggest issues with Switch versions of games is because of the limited power of the console. And we can see that in this game. Most of the time, the game runs at 60 frames per second, but there's just a large portion of this game that is horribly optimized, especially during some of the boat races. Now, it's not all bad. Some very fun elements of the game keep you enticed, like an entire leveling up system, which pretty much just lets you get some new upgrades for your car. I think most of the unique things about this game is the slime. The slime is similar to the charge pads in F-Zero. It's mainly used to build up your boost gauge, but that's the most unique thing about this game. I think the absolute worst thing about this isn't the performance, isn't the graphics, and it's not even the fact that it's on Switch. It's the fact this game has almost zero personality. The characters aren't nearly as quirky as they are in their cartoons. I mainly blame the horrific animations and the lack of voice acting. These characters have no voice clips. Even though there are hundreds of voice clips from their countless episodes each character is in, the reason there's no voice clips is because of some licensing issues with Nickelodeon. But because of the lack of personality in each of these characters, there's almost no reason to play this game at all. This is just a crappy racing game with the skin of Nickelodeon characters. So even though this game represents SpongeBob really well, the overall joy of Nickelodeon isn't really represented well here at all. This easily goes in D. Thankfully, they have 2 more tries. Oh yeah, I'm also ranking these games. SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated. Now, I used to play this game a ton on the GameCube. For those who don't know, this is a remake of a game that was released back in 2003. Now, I didn't play it back then because I was 1, but I did play it later on when I found it used at GameStop when I was like 8. I don't remember beating the original, but I do remember having a good time. Now, looking at Rehydrated, this was released in summer 2020. This game was decently liked by nostalgic fans, but to newcomers and critics, the hype wasn't as understandable. And that's proven with the score of 66 critic score on Metacritic, while the fan scores were in the high 80s. It's clear the audience for this was split, but let's jump in and play this on Switch. So first off, just in the main menu, we can see the textures don't look too great, but what's promising is the smooth 60 frames per second on SpongeBob. Let's hope the game runs that smooth. Just kidding, I know it doesn't, because I played this game briefly when I compared 50 games on Switch and Steam Deck. The game is a classic SpongeBob tale. Starts off with Plankton wanting to steal the Krabby Patty formula, so he makes robots to try and get it, but whoopsies, the machine is in don't obey mode. I had the same issue with my car. The scene quickly transitions into SpongeBob and Patrick in the house playing and talking, which is fine, but wow, do these cutscenes look horrible, especially compared to what we got later on with SpongeBob games. This cutscene looks goofy and rushed, and the Switch version magnifies some issues. Like a few seconds into the first cutscene, we got some major texture popping, and the animations look so stale, especially when fans are so used to seeing these characters bending the laws of physics in the TV show. And oh man, the scene with SpongeBob in his room sleeping, my boy doesn't even use a blanket and literally levitates upwards to get out of bed. Anyways, that's not what's important here. Cutscenes are just a few seconds of the game, whatever. Let's get to the gameplay. This is the classic game Rehydrated. Speaking of, this is the iconic 3D platformer where you go from level to level and search for stars. I mean golden spatulas. As you go through the levels, you're tasked with helping familiar characters, defeating enemies, and finding collectibles, while also leading to boss fights. At this point, you most likely know what the game is and how it plays. If you're a SpongeBob fan, you've most likely played it. To me, this feels like it takes a lot of inspiration from Super Mario 64. The first Bikini Bottom level especially, with the King Jellyfish at the top of the mountain. Like, come on. This game can feel very dramatic at times, mainly with the interesting platforming and different characters you play as, which makes certain levels feel more interesting. But underneath this more than fun platformer, there are some issues that help me understand these subpar critic scores we saw from earlier. As we noticed with the cutscenes, there are some pretty janky animations and the overall clunky gameplay mechanics. Don't get me wrong, nothing game-breaking. But there's some odd choices, like the stale look when Patrick throws melons, or Sandy's whip that's helping her glide in the air. Like, how is that holding her up? A lot of this stems from the fact this is an older game, but I think a lot of it has to do with the boring animations and lack of reinventing what made these games great. My biggest issue was how unfinished it felt, especially as a remake. We generally expect remakes to fix and improve the older games for the better, but instead, we just see different problems here. The audio levels are one of the biggest issues I had with this game. I'm an audio guy, and I'm not a game developer, but there's basic audio leveling that needed to be done here that simply wasn't. Like the first boss fight. It was a fine boss fight, but it went from a decently loud cutscene to a fight segment where you'd want the music to rock out and be intense while you're fighting this king jellyfish, but the music gets incredibly quiet while the voice clips all stay the default level. So if I did turn it up and hear the music, the voice clips are blasting. And speaking of voice clips, I found that for some reason, the same voice clip would get triggered over and over again.
This is where I keep all my old comic books. This is where I keep all my old comic books.
But this is most likely across all platforms, not just the Switch. And generally, this is just something that people don't think about, as they may not have an ear for it, or they're 5. Now, I know I briefly touched on some animation and audio issues, but there's a few other things I noticed about the Switch version that I want to talk about. As we know at this point, the Switch version of games don't always run the best, especially compared to the other console counterparts. And I think it's fun to look at the Switch itself and see what the developers did to get it run on this console, especially a platformer like this. Well, first thing you notice is the frame rate. The frame rate can get very choppy and inconsistent. Most of the game plays at 30 frames per second and can get lower depending on what's going on. But I think the weirdest thing is that the game can play at 60 frames per second during certain sections. I didn't realize until an hour in that the frame rate isn't actually locked. But again, this is only if there's nothing crazy going on in the environment around you, and it's very rare to see the game running this smooth. The overall resolution and textures are lower, with some lighting effects being gone too. And let's not forget about the render distance. But none of these things will really affect the gameplay like the frame rate does. And I still found myself wanting to push through this version of the game. The only thing that kind of feels weird about it is the fact it's a remake and you want to see all the new graphics they added, and you can't really see all the intense graphics on the Switch, especially compared to like a PS4, but it's fine here. No doubt this is a fine game, even fun at best. But at its worst, it's a choppy version of an old game with a fresh can of paint. This is a fun game at its core and quite enjoyable, but it's also dated feeling, with it being more like a remaster instead of a remake. Though it might feel dated, it holds up fine in terms of gameplay. It's maybe worth a quick playthrough if it strikes your fancy. I'm putting this in B tier. It wasn't long after Battle for Bikini Bottom we saw the next SpongeBob game, Nickelodeon Kart Racers 2. Yay! We get more. Clearly they just wanted to make it better, right? No. This game released in October 2020. At first glance, it seemed like Nickelodeon wanted to improve on the horrible showing of the first entry, but there's only one way to find out. Now again, this technically isn't a SpongeBob game, but it still counts, and we gotta see how they've improved, especially the SpongeBob side of things. Okay, wow! Right away, we see a huge increase in quality. This doesn't look like a bargain bin game. It's clear a lot more effort was put into this one. Better graphics, better menus, bigger roster of characters, better kart customization, side characters, and these character models don't look like the other low poly trash we got in the last Kart Racer installment. They're absolutely better, but still a little janky. The game's lighting and effects are improved, and same with the UI, which kind of shows how bad the last game was. This game feels so much better. I can actually see and make out what's happening here. Doesn't make me nearly as confused as the first one. Here I can actually see what's happening to me if I spun out, or where to go on the track, which was a huge issue before. It's also fun that you can unlock new characters and side characters. The side characters are a nice addition and gives you specific buffs, like Gary giving you extra slime. This feels like a more finished version of the first game. It also has multiplayer, time trials, Grand Prix, and heck, even a battle mode in the likes of Mario Kart Balloon Battle, which is fun. This feels like a kart racer I wouldn't mind sinking a few hours into, and I did. But there were a few major issues here that weren't fixed from the first game. We still have no voice acting for these iconic characters. This was a huge issue for the first one, and they didn't even fix it. A huge part of what makes these characters fun and show off their personality is due to their voice acting. And with that gone, they feel bland, almost like a cardboard cutout of what they're supposed to be. The other huge issue, which is most likely a Switch issue, is of course the performance. While the game aims for 60 frames per second, which which is pretty important, the game drops frames horribly. And it's in every single match. The sheer amount of effects and items are too much. There most likely isn't a 10-second gap between hitches. This is bad and there's no getting around it. I don't want to say it's unplayable, but it makes me not want to play it. There's been times where I'm about to take a jump and then get blasted with hitching and it completely throws me off. So I'm happy they improved a lot of things, but those two lingering issues, which are pretty substantial to a game like this, make me put this in C. A little better than the first one, but still lacking. Next! SpongeBob SquarePants Krusty Cook-Off, which is technically a Switch exclusive. The game just seems kind of boring, but this is the reason we don't judge a book by its cover. I was addicted to this game for hours in my first sitting. This absolutely rocked me. So if you can't tell by the gameplay, this is a cooking simulator. I've never really been into these cooking simulators because I just didn't have the patience to play them. I wrote this off like any other mobile-looking game there is on Switch. Essentially, the way it works is you have your kitchen that can make pancakes or Krabby Patties and a wide variety of other foods later in the game, and you get customers that ask you to make something, and it's your job to serve it to them as fast as possible. Maybe they want pancakes with pink jelly. Well, you better hope you've plated and cooked a pancake to put jelly on. And there's also a drink station to keep track of too. As you play, you'll earn money, which can be put into upgrading your kitchen equipment, which can speed up and increase the amount of food you can make. You can also increase the quality of food to make it earn more money per serving. Something I really enjoyed was the speed and rhythm you get into. Literally in the later half of the pancake section, I was serving pancakes like there is no tomorrow, like speed running. And I think this is a huge part of the fun. It's satisfying to serve customers and nail it so fast. And what helps is the controller layout. After getting used to what button does what, it's all muscle memory and feels great to pull off serving combos, even when using the Joy-Con. There were a few minor things I noticed about the game, like when I was flipping Krabby Patties. Sometimes the character model wouldn't appear and the order would just show up. This would make it a little more jarring when you didn't expect another order. But that was the biggest issue. This may seem pretty basic at first, but again, I was addicted for a while. Even though it's not some high-end 3D platformer, I was thoroughly enjoying my experience playing this game. And it's a fairly long game too. I played it long enough to get the gist of it, and I plan on playing it more if I have some free time on a road trip and my Switch is with me. But wait a second, why don't I just get the free app? That's right, there's a mobile version of this game, and there's a surprising amount that's different about this version that might make me want to keep the Switch version. First of all, the name on the Apple App Store isn't called Krusty Cook-Off. Instead, it's just called SpongeBob Cook-Off Simulator. But once you open the app on mobile, then you get the full name. Except with the Switch, they added the Extra Krusty Edition, and the physical game even comes with a poster and the first skin DLC. Let's take a look at some of the differences between these versions, because I'm sure you're thinking, why would I bother getting the Switch version when I can just get a smaller, more portable, and free version? Well, the first thing you'll notice is the touchscreen on mobile, which surprisingly wasn't carried over to the Switch. This makes the mobile game feel oddly slower because you have to click around a lot more to accomplish things you could do with a single button press on a controller. You have to individually send out orders by tapping instead of just giving the order automatically to the right customer on Switch. At the end of the day, this is a free mobile game. So how are they making money? Oh! The mobile version introduces so many mobile gimmicks. In the mobile version, every time you upgrade your gear, you have to wait for it to be delivered, which takes actual real-life time. This isn't in the Switch version. When you upgrade something, it just appears. But don't worry, if you don't want to wait for your items to upgrade, you can, of course, speed these wait times up when you use gems. How much are gems? Oh, just over $100 for the largest bundle. Well, at that point, I'm better off paying $30 for the physical game or $15 for the digital game and playing the version that doesn't even have gems or time limitations at all. And this is the mobile version's biggest flaw, forcefully slowing down progression so you play longer and potentially spend money, and a ton of money at that. The free mobile version screams mobile, optional microtransactions, ads, and touchscreen. Now, to be fair, the ads seem to be mostly optional, but give you 20% more coins after each match. Now, there are reasons you might actually want the mobile version over the Switch, since it seems to still be actively developed and may get new content and updates. Another mobile advantage would be these in-game events. But who cares? Are there actually people adamantly playing this? If so, let me know in the comments. Even if you choose the mobile version, it's going to take forever to grind to the newest content. And honestly, maybe it's just because I'm not a mobile gamer, but I'm not willing to invest that much time into a game I could play through faster and better on Switch. But anyways, just because this game looks like a mobile game doesn't mean you should write it off. This is an actual game on Switch with a tiny, somewhat uninteresting story that allows you to fly through it just like you would any other game. So I might be a goofy goober YouTuber for doing this, but I'm throwing it in A. I had a ton of fun playing this like an actual game. After that, we got a new Nickelodeon crossover with Nickelodeon AllStar's Brawl. This game was released back in October 2021, and many deem this as Smash Bros, but with cartoons. And yeah, that was quite fitting. This had kind of a rocky start, but was huge in the community and seemed to remain relevant longer than most expected, especially with the trickle release of DLC fighters that were later included in the game, like Hugh Neutron. I did an old video where I talked about this game on Switch, and I also compared it against the Steam Deck version in another video. But I also wanted to revisit this today to see how it fares with fresh eyes and to see if they changed anything since. This is far better than the last time I played. First of all, the fighting in this game isn't nearly as fluid or polished like some other top tier fighters like Smash, but this is a fine fighter all by itself. It's not the easiest to control or get the hang of, but if you spend enough time with it, you could. So it's not super fair to judge this game in that way, especially since I haven't really mastered the mechanics. But what I have played is pretty fun. After a while, I was actually dunking people with Patrick. Let me get a Patrick man in the chat. There's an actual community around this game, and a pretty loyal fan base. But back when the game launched, the Smash community got a hold of it, and the glaring differences in quality were quite apparent. Not to mention, at launch, there was a multitude of Switch performance issues like slight hitching, but the biggest issue was, of course, the voice acting. Or should I say a lack of it, because just like the first two kart racers, there was silence. Nowadays, this is a fine fighting game on Switch. It runs at a solid 60 frames per second, and that's important for a fighting game. But there's no denying this game still looks rough. There's stale animations, lacking textures, and a lack of visual effects. I will give it some points because they did eventually add in the much needed voice clips and a handful of free and paid DLC. They also added items, and the game is chock full of callbacks to shows, far more than the first kart racers. So this is in B. Next we got, cars. That's right, instead of a full game, we got SpongeBob Hot Wheels Unleashed Racing Season. You can't access it anymore, but it was a cool DLC that included a variety of unique SpongeBob inspired cars. But since I can't play it anymore, I'm gonna put it in the I couldn't play tier. But since we can't play with cars, let's play with karts for the third time in Nickelodeon Kart Racers 3, Slime Speedway. Like seriously, we haven't got a new mainline Mario Kart in over 10 years, but we get 3 Nickelodeon Kart Racers within 4 years? Yikes, we're actually doomed. Let's see if third time's the charm. Okay, so at first glance, they did very little to improve the main menu. It's the exact same, except for the splash screens are now 3D renders. But there are some major improvements with this new installment. Let's talk voice acting. It's here, finally, and it's what we wanted. This adds a lot to the game. So much personality and charm, it finally feels like we're playing a Nickelodeon kart racer. But surprisingly, that's not the best improvement of the game, but it's actually the racing itself. They did a huge overhaul on the game's mechanics, and it pays off. Driving is more fun, drifting feels more natural, and the camera and animations make you feel like you're moving way faster and adds to the intensity in a good way. Everything has been improved, and it's a lot of fun. I've genuinely been enjoying my time with it compared to the last 2 kart racers. There is a lot here. New cups, lots of unlockable vehicle parts, and characters. This is a really great package for sure. But the big issue I'm dealing with now? Well, the Switch version is making it very difficult to play. Let's talk about the Switchness of the game. First of all, it's 30 frames per second. Yes, they did so much of the game, graphics and gameplay wise, that they had to make the game run at 30 frames per second, which really only sucks because the last installments were 60 frames per second. It's not actually uncommon to see 30 frames per second kart racers. And the best example I have is Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled. That game ran at 30 frames per second on all consoles, even though the PlayStation 4 could have easily pushed it to 60. But on Switch, it gets worse. The issue isn't that it's capped at 30, but it's that it barely stays there. This game chugs hard, and it's very difficult to get a consistent frame rate. In one way, I'm glad they made all these gameplay improvements, but oh boy does it show. Not only does the frame rate take a hit, but so does the resolution. This game is doing something called dynamic resolution, which lowers the game's resolution to keep the performance at a playable rate, but it gets super pixelated and very difficult to see certain objects or the track in the distance because of this. There is so much potential here, but the performance on Switch absolutely stunts the playability. That being said, it's still better than the first 2. And just to make sure I'm not being too hard on the frame rate, I checked out the PS5 version because there was a free trial for PlayStation Plus subscribers, and it ran like a dream at a buttery smooth 60 frames per second at 4K resolution. So actually, from what I can tell, there shouldn't be this many performance issues with Kart Racers 3 on Switch. That being said, it's still much better and a more than decent kart racer. So I'm putting this in low B, mainly because of the performance issues. For what it is, it's not bad, maybe just don't get it on Switch. Finally though, we get a pure original SpongeBob 3D platformer, SpongeBob SquarePants The Cosmic Shake. The Cosmic Shake released in January 2023, and this game follows the success of Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated, with the game coming very close in the gameplay department. So let's take another look at Cosmic Shake for Switch. I also did a full in-depth review on this game when it came out. Maybe check it out if you want after this one, but I'll touch on my experience here. Compared to the last 3D platformer, everything just feels fine-tuned. The overall graphics are just better. The animations are a pleasant improvement, especially the cutscenes. This looks like a 3D cartoon. There's still some similar graphical issues going on, like the texture pop-in, but it's much faster here and less noticeable. Oh, and look, SpongeBob does use his blanket. The game starts with SpongeBob and Patrick being goofy guys when they stumble across an item that can grant wishes. They then discover that this device can't be used by mortals and open a giant black hole, and are then forced to discover different areas of the game while saving Bikini Bottom. Once again, just like Battle for Bikini Bottom, a very SpongeBob-y story here. Unlike Rehydrated, this isn't rehydrated and is just normally hydrated. This time around, you're running through levels as SpongeBob only, while slowly unlocking new abilities as you play. You'll also be able to unlock new costumes and use those in certain levels if you want it. The level design is much more modern in a few aspects, but also not incredibly challenging in others. This feels very similar to Battle for Bikini Bottom, but instead of you changing characters, you're unlocking them through SpongeBob, which is fine. It adds a better and more modern approach to character upgrades in my opinion, but I don't really have too much to say about it, aside from the fact it's a decent platformer that doesn't really reinvent the wheel and just follows a pretty basic 3D platformer formula that you'll enjoy your time with, but might not be the most memorable. There are a lot of charm with the characters, and that's probably the best part. Although it's worth noting that this isn't super polished, but that's something I expect at this point, which is kind of sad. This is really just a better installment with more of the things fans loved about Bikini Bottom. And quickly looking at the Switch quirks, the game runs at 30 frames per second with the typical frame dips. Nowhere near as bad as Kart Racers 3, but you'd recognize it. Other than that, the resolution is very sharp, the draw distance is improved, and the shading is mostly there. There's obviously a ton of graphical improvements with the current gen console versions, but nothing that's not worth playing it on Switch for. While we're on the topic of current gen consoles, this game did something kinda silly. In 2023, when the game was released, it only came out for last gen consoles. There was no PS5 or Series X port at launch, and that was only last year. They eventually did release current gen console versions later on. So silly. And I touched on SpongeBob Krusty Cook-Off being a mobile game, but did you know this also has a mobile version, which is kind of similar graphically to the Switch, except you need to use touchscreen controls, and it is way cheaper, but doesn't have ads like Krusty Cook-Off. It's just bizarre that this game got a mobile port. But anyways, this is a fantastic game that is more than playable on Switch, and adds more of what fans wanted into a new package. So yeah, I'm throwing it an A. Brawl, holla. I don't play this game, but SpongeBob is in it, so we're looking at it. His limbs just feel kind of disproportioned. The animations are great, and the callback with his weapons is cool. Patrick is here too, but his arms are kind of cursed. And Sandy, same thing. Seems like all the characters have the same model and idle animations. Similar to Fortnite. I didn't realize this at first, but now it's making more sense. Each character collab has unique items, emotes, and a bunch of random stuff. Now again, I'm not a huge fan of this game, but I think it's super appealing how many collabs there are, and that you can just access any skin you want at any time, unlike a game like Fortnite when you need to wait for it to appear in the shop. But there's something about this game I don't really love, whether it's the bloated and low quality menus or the somewhat confusing controls for me as a newcomer. It's not amazing, but this isn't really a SpongeBob game, it's more DLC. And with these being somewhat cursed models and the lack of fun this game brings me, I'm throwing this in C. Speaking of DLC, we have a game I did a video on over a year ago. I'm of course talking about SpongeBob Power Wash Simulator. I can't believe this game has enough traction to get SpongeBob DLC. Not only that, but it even has Final Fantasy, Tomb Raider, and Back to the Future DLC. I don't know why it's here or why I paid $11 for it, but let's take a look. In this DLC, you play as a cleaner, and SpongeBob hires you saying Gary had a surprise party, and it got messy. What in the world were they doing at that party? Why wasn't I invited? Squidward blames him and will do something bad, and if we clean it all up, we get all the Krabby Patties we want. So this is pretty much just you power washing SpongeBob, Squidward, and Patrick's house. I don't really have much to add aside from that. Aside from the fact the game now includes gyro, because when the game first came out, it didn't. Power Wash Simulator goes in B tier. We also have Minecraft. Now this is essentially an entire SpongeBob game, but inside a multi-billion-dollar giant. I keep forgetting how massive the Minecraft store page is and how many crazy crossovers there are. But now I have to buy $15 worth of mine coins. So let's check this one out for the first time together. So we're in and it opens like a cartoon. For some reason, it was a little glitchy, but whatever. While I'm here, I better pick a SpongeBob character. We have so many to choose from. Bubble Buddy, Larry the Lobster, Fred. So I'll pick my favorite, Shadow the Hedgehog. Let's talk to Squidward. Squidward. Oh, and now I'm going into his house. What the? Squidward is asking me to craft an instrument by searching for parts around his house. So after finding parts, I made myself a drum kit. I then am asked to go downtown to perform for people. So using my offbeat drums, I played for individuals. I don't know why, but yikes, the frame rate is tanking here. After that, I performed in front of a bunch of people, which once again was kind of glitchy. And then I've received a clarinet to defend the Krusty Krab. Let's see what Patrick wants. He wants to go to Glove World on a new ride, and it's broken, so now it's my job to fix it. Shadow the Hedgehog to the rescue. After building 5 beams, yay! Woo! Yeah! Okay, what's next? Mr. Krabs needs my help at the Krusty Krab. So pretty much need to defend the cash register from these guys. There's waves of customers, and Shadow must help SpongeBob serve patties to get the most amount of money before they come and destroy the cash register. Oh, SpongeBob, help! Help me! What's going on? Please! Please! That was actually fun. The Switch also has some difficulty with this, but yeah, that's SpongeBob Minecraft. A bunch of Minecraft minigames with a SpongeBob skin. It's actually quite fun. The best one was the Krusty Krab, for sure, but it's pretty decent DLC with a lot of charm. I just hate the dumb Minecoin shop ecosystem. It's literally slower than the Nintendo eShop when it even works. B tier. Nickelodeon AllStar's Brawl 2. This game is the most recent SpongeBob game, but it gets really silly, especially on the Switch. First of all, there were a lot of complaints from the community about the Switch version of this game specifically, and it's that this game released physically, but with a digital code. This was infuriating for those physical collectors, especially considering the other console releases of this game were on a disc. It just didn't make sense. Like, why? Is it because they wanted the physical sales crowd, but if they didn't like the game on Switch, they had no way of returning it to the store? Did they do this because they knew the Switch version had so many issues that they wanted to prevent refunds? What's even more weird is that after the initial release, when the diehards had already bought their copies, they went to release a proper physical cartridge for the game exclusively on US Amazon only. For those who are wondering, of course I got the physical cartridge version. I had to. The hardest part was the fact I don't live in America, so we didn't get it here in Canada. So I had to get a family member who just happened to be in America to order a copy and pick it up and bring it here. My life is so hard. Once it loaded in, eventually, I was shocked by the awesome music and the home screen and the new art style. Oddly, this is reminding me a lot of a new Smash game. Returning fighters, some missing from previous titles, it's wild. Jumping into gameplay, and oh my gosh! I hadn't really seen much footage of this game, hadn't played it, and I wasn't really following it before release. But I'm blown away with how great this feels, especially in comparison to the first game. This genuinely feels like I was playing Smash 4 and then Ultimate came out. The characters have so much character. You can tell these are from cartoons. The old moves they carried over are reanimated to look more fluent. Some characters are better proportioned with each other in the stage. I'm impressed that there's so much care and thought put into this game, especially since the last release was just slapped together and fixed later with patches. This is a new and exciting installment that they took their time on. They listened to the community, wrote it down, and took action. But there are still some flaws. I think a huge issue with the Switch is the extensive load times. While it's not bad when you're playing with friends in basic battle mode, if you're in single player and jumping between game modes, the load times add up and feel extremely long. I would say the campaign mode, which is awesome, is about 20% load times. In fact, some load times are so long, they stay. Yeah, in campaign mode, I had the game freeze on me, and I don't know if it was just a Switch specific issue, but definitely something I didn't love, especially after realizing how long these load times take. But hands down, the biggest issue, 30 frames per second. I could handle it with kart racing, but for a competitive fighter, I'm a little less lenient. You can just tell that it's a lot slower than what it should be. It feels like there's latency, even though there might not be. And it's the frame rate that makes this game feel completely difficult to play. I feel like my fighting is a lot less planned and more button mashy because I don't know if my inputs really did anything in that moment. And I know it doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but seriously, this is a huge problem with platform fighters. Aside from that, the game looks surprisingly good. It's not a super sharp resolution, and the textures and lighting effects leave a lot to be desired, but it's a massive improvement. I would have liked to see some sort of performance mode somehow, but oh well. It really just makes me incredibly thankful for how amazing a game like Smash is. 1080p, 60 frames per second, and it's quite literally the perfect fighting game in my opinion. And Nickelodeon All-Stars Brawl takes a lot from that game. It's got the classic mode, an arcade mode with mini games that make you pop balloons, also known as Target Smash. It has a whole campaign where you battle dark form opponents, and then you can use them after you defeat them, all while also going through and unlocking stat buffs. Again, just like what we see in World of Light in Smash Ultimate. I know it might be a bit unfair to compare these games with each other, but this is a Switch review, and this game is on Switch. So why would you buy Nickelodeon over Smash? Well, it's less than half the price if you can wait for a sale, and Smash never never goes on sale. Nickelodeon All-Stars Brawl is a great way to fuel your fighting game addiction while we wait for the next Smash game, and is incredibly underrated. I never tried it at launch because the first game kind of left a sour taste in my mouth. As for the SpongeBob representation, this is full of it. SpongeBob is easily the most represented series here, and that makes sense. Across all these games, SpongeBob is on the front cover. He's the Mario of Nickelodeon. And while a lot of these games with SpongeBob aren't technically SpongeBob games, there's a reason there's so many crossovers and appearances of these iconic sea creatures. But for me, this game goes in A. I know, I was complaining a lot, but it's a good game. This game has one of the biggest improvements and is showing me the rise of these SpongeBob games. And as we went through the timeline of these SpongeBob games, the quality really only got better and better. Starting off with some horrific modeling to an amazing platform fighter with over-the-top personality and representation. This is a good sign for the future of SpongeBob games. Oh, and also I think SpongeBob's gonna be in Fortnite in the future. Just saying. This is the final tier list, with Cosmic Shake being the winner. Check out more of my videos featuring SpongeBob here, and consider becoming a channel member to see videos early and get some exclusive content. Please consider liking and subscribing. I hope to see you in the next one. See you later.